Welcome back to the Hooked with TMO fishing podcast, where we talk about fishing, recovery, some ranting, and whatever else we feel like. Got a special one for you today. Yes, very special. I'm joined by my daughter, Katie, and granddaughter, Ellie. For those of you not watching the video, you can hear her grunting while she eats blueberries and strawberries in the background. We're going to just talk a little bit today about what it was like growing up with a father in recovery. And then maybe if we have time, we'll talk about what her experience was like as I grew through the fishing industry or grow through the fishing industry. Anyway, so say hello, Kate.
Hi.
I'm sober 28 years. I was 2 years sober when Katie was born. So she's seen all of it in some ways. Probably doesn't remember some of the early days, but you've seen all of it. You've been there for all of it, except the first couple of years, which thank God you didn't have to experience that. I wouldn't ask anybody to experience my first 2 years of sobriety. It was brutal. Right? Yeah, I was 2 years sober when you were born. So in the first episode, for any of you that listened to the one on my story, I didn't talk a lot about my daughter because I knew that I wanted to get into it here in its own episode, just because she has her own perspective on what it's been like. Because I get lots of pats on the back and props, but it hasn't always been roses. As a recovering alcoholic, I think we're prone, especially early on, to make a lot of mistakes. So I've certainly made my share. But the beauty of being in recovery, especially in AA, is that program's pretty much focused around kind of turning things around and making wrongs right and making amends and changing behavior and learning how to grunt through your food. Like this little one. Yep. She's about as happy as they get. Yes, that's how I felt eating that 16-ounce ribeye last night. Anyways. What are some of the earliest memories you have of like going to meetings or my sobriety?
I remember everyone was really nice. I remember whether they were in your inner circle in AA and we saw them on a regular basis, or whether they were just people in meetings that we saw only at meetings. Everyone was super nice to me.
Yeah.
I remember going out to IHOP after. That was
Bigford's.
Bigford's, yes.
Yeah.
That was a big thing. I just remember I had to be quiet. Like that was like the one thing. And I remember one thing that stuck with me a lot through the years is listening to people's stories and like thinking like, wow, like how can alcohol make someone act like that? Like, just not understanding being so young and just hearing people talk about, obviously they're sober for a reason. So their stories were sometimes pretty brutal, and just hearing that.
I think for kids that grow up in AA, it's not really much of an adjustment because it's just something you've always done. Yeah. So for the listeners, have brought Kate to meetings. She was my little buddy when she was, a toddler. And so when her mom and I were together, she didn't always go to meetings with me, but Katie did. And yeah, that's funny. She went to every meeting with me for a long time. And I can remember bringing, you were probably, I don't know, some blank paper and crayons, and she'd sit at the table next to me, and she wouldn't say a peep until the break in the meeting. She'd just sit there and draw pictures and color. And when the break was over, we'd sit right back down and start coloring again. She didn't grunt and scream while she ate berries like this one does.
Yeah,
I think she's pretty funny. But life in AA is, for me, that hour of the day was the easiest time of my day. Always back then, it was the easiest hour of my entire day. It was the time before and after that was so hard, and not just on a sobriety standpoint, just in my own behavior and learning, how to be a better person and a better parent. I didn't have good role models. My father was, God rest his soul, he was my hero, and I loved him as much as any son could love a father. We were very close my whole life, but he was not the best role model. I had to relearn and unlearn a lot of things that he taught me, and there were a lot of tendencies that he had growing up. You know, he was physically abusive. Yeah, he was physically abusive to the women he was with when I was little. I witnessed a lot of that, and that was very traumatic. And the plus side of that was that I swore I would never really go home to a woman. So luckily, you know, you've never had to experience any of that physical abuse, but there was certainly a lot of dysfunction, you know, growing up. You know, it's easy when you're divorced to, you know, to blame the other side and be like, yeah, she was horrible. That's why we're divorced, because she was a nightmare. But, you know, for all of its faults, like I was no saint. I was a train wreck. You know, I got sober and then decided I want to have a baby. You know, I met your mom in rehab, which is like, there's a reason they say don't do it. And I'm super happy that you're here. So that was the positive, but they go south a lot. Rehab romances go south a lot. And so that was kind of the first indication that we didn't really have the best shot at, you know, peace and serenity in our home. But I had a lot of dysfunction growing up, and nobody ever taught me, you know, Nan, my grandmother, she never taught me how to pay bills. When she would sit down to pay the bills, she would say, oh, you don't need to know this. You're just a kid. And so I never learned it. And then I moved out on my own. And then a couple of years later, you know, had you, and your mom had 2 kids already. So we had, you know, family, and I was, for the most part, the sole breadwinner, and wasn't making much money, and trying to learn how to raise a family. And so there was a lot of dysfunction. You know, I wouldn't call it, it certainly wasn't physically abusive. Yeah, I guess there was some, you know, emotional abuse between your mother and I, which is never good to do in front of kids. And I think that was the one thing that bothered me the most when you were small was the fact that you had to witness the arguing and the dysfunction. I mean, I don't think we ever lived anywhere for more than 6 months.
Yeah.
Until after your mother and I divorced. You know, and moving a lot is really disruptive to children. They never get to settle. They go into different schools, and, you know, she'd get tired of the place that we lived, and she'd want to move, and I'd follow along because it was easier than fighting about it. And I didn't really have a clue either. I wasn't very settled, so I just went with it. And as time went on, I got tired of moving a lot. But, you know, it was those hours outside of the meetings that made it really tough. And there was a lot of yelling early on, and, you know, a lot of dysfunction. And I don't know how much of that, you know, you really remember from the early days, but, you know, I think it's easy to look at somebody who is sober as long as I am, you know, if they've kind of changed, you know, and become somebody, you know, different, to look and think, oh, look, sobriety is amazing. And it is amazing, but you don't just get sober and become somebody different right away. You know, I said this in the last podcast with Ryan Lilly. If you take the booze out of a drunk jerk, you're left with a jerk, sober jerk. You know, you and I were always close. I think our most difficult time was between 16 and 18 for you.
I'd say like 16 and probably like 19 or 20, but that's because I was going through my own stuff and just distance.
Yeah.
Being wild.
Yep. Yeah, it's hard. You know, and then obviously your mother and I divorced, which I know was incredibly hard on you. It was, you know, you were the reason that I stayed, you know, as long as I could, just because I really did not want you to be, you know, a child of a divorced family, because it's just so hard. But, you know, at some point you're doing more damage by staying than you are. You know, I've had so many friends whose parents divorced when they were adults, waited until they were adults and moved off to get divorced. And the kids all said, why couldn't you have done that when I was little? Yeah. And spared me all those years of dysfunction and not getting along and not liking each other and awkwardness. But AA life was good to us for a long time. Well, it's always been good to us, but, you know, I mean, that was kind of my community. That was our social life surrounded or revolved around being in AA, you know, cookouts and anniversary parties and weddings and there was always something, cookouts. There was always, something going on. And we definitely formed a kind of like a family group of AA people that we hung out with. And I think that was probably one of the things that saved me as far as keeping me on track, to be a parent, because it was people to keep me in check, because you were around and they those people modeled good behavior, and gave me something to look forward to, but, or something to look to achieve different than how I was doing it. It wasn't all, bad and dysfunction, but there was definitely some dysfunction there.
I definitely know for a fact it was the people in AA that definitely kept you level-headed during that time period, because it was definitely rough, but I really didn't see almost any of it, like, ever. Like, you were very good at keeping it separate from me.
Yeah. Do you remember any of your thoughts back then? Like, I remember when I went to live with my grandmother, I didn't really give it much thought. Granted, I was told it was just temporary. So I just kind of was just like, okay, I'm just along for the ride. But, we went from, seeing each other literally every day to seeing each other 2 or 3 times a week. Yeah.
I don't remember too much from when you and Mom got divorced. I think I was 5. I was pretty young, but like I said, I do remember, I remember right when you first moved out. And that was really rough, like coming to see you. I'm pretty sure we were staying in the same room when I would come to see you. That I just remember that was pretty tough. But I don't really remember thinking like, wow, this is awful. It was just kind of like, oh, my dad's here now. Like, that's what it is, because I was little. Yeah. And I often wonder if, some of that is the chaos factor had, at least the fighting between her and I, and the inconsistency, because it was, things would be great one minute and then it would be in crisis the next, and it would be, 180-degree switch. So, part of the reason I left is just to end that. I mean, we didn't get along. I knew that we weren't going to end up together forever. We did not get along at all, and very rare. And so that was, the biggest driving factor for why I got out of there, because it was just so chaotic and so damaging. I knew that it was damaging, and that you were going to learn bad, relationship skills, and you were going to learn to stay in a relationship that, that was dysfunctional, and I knew that leaving wasn't going to prevent that, but I knew at least you weren't going to learn it from me. Yeah. That's what I had hoped. So I was in and out of AA, I believe, when your mom got pregnant. I don't think I had got sober. No, I did when your mom was pregnant. I was sober in 93. You were born in 94, a little over a year after I got sober. But that was a tough time for me. And thank God you were an infant, because that was when I did a year sober, and then I did a year of what I call couch AA, and slipped into a really, really fun depression on the couch. Literally did some couch AA. Then got, started kind of getting my legs under me in sobriety, and then it was just chaos. And then your mom and I divorced. And then it was, it's just been, several years since. And you guys eventually moved to Somersworth. And I didn't really, I remember a lot of, what your life was like. There was some trouble, as far as like with school, and them trying to get a hold of your mom, and her not, being available and stuff. And, eventually I got more involved in school. But for the most part, it seemed like you were pretty happy in that neighborhood. You had a lot of friends there. Some of them you're still friends with, a lot of them you're still friends with now. And your brother, Ricky. What were those? And those were the years when I was, remarried, and then eventually you moved. You were a teenager when you guys moved to Portsmouth. You said 7th grade, 8th grade. Yeah, I was like 12 or 13.
Yeah, and that's when things started to kind of change for you. And I know you went through your own rough patch as well. I guess a lot of people could think, that because there was, this dysfunction and divorce, and, lots of sometimes neighborhood dysfunction and trauma and people going through their own stuff in the neighborhoods that, they like to blame and pick what's, this is the reason, but eventually you started to struggle yourself and through school and in school. And, what was all that like?
It's weird thinking back on it because I remember when I was going to Somersworth, like you think Portsmouth and Somersworth now, and you're like, Portsmouth is such a nicer area. Like Somersworth is so bad, but I was like a straight A honor roll student when I went to Somersworth. Like as long as my work was getting turned in, it was all graded beautifully, and then I moved to Portsmouth and I was there for, 2 months. And then I just started, getting in trouble and not caring like about what anybody thought. And my mom worked in Portsmouth and she was working all the time. And my brother was home and he was, at this point, he's 5 or 6 years older than me. So at this point, he was well into his teen years, almost in his 20s. Yeah. So he was doing his own thing. And I just started acting out. And at this point, I was mom's third kid. And she was just like, I'm done with it. There's no stopping me. And I was relentless. I was skipping school and skipping class and talking back to teachers. That was my big thing. I had a bad mouth. Yeah. And that's what got me in trouble a lot. And then as I got older, once I hit high school, it was like, that was kind of game over for me. Cause at that point, my friends were driving and my friends were drinking and my friends were doing drugs and my friends were, getting in trouble. And a lot of my friends' parents didn't care. So it was those kids that I hung out with and it ended up getting me into some pretty serious trouble. Yep.
Yeah, that was pretty much the same for me. High school, that was it. My grandmother worked at the junior high. So once I got away from her, it was like, whew, thank God. And I just ran with it. My dad got sober, a handful of times when I was growing up. And I don't think he might've had a year once, 6 months was kind of the norm for him. He'd stay sober for a while and then he'd be right back at it again. And, he drank hard. What's it like I know what it's like to just dive into that party scene and give it all you got. What's it like to do that though, when you have such an involved parent or involved in your life who's also involved in AA, having grown up in AA?
It was at first, it was like, I was smoking weed at like 13. I was like, don't let my dad find out, like nervous. And then as I got older, it was kind of like screw you. Like, and then even well into my 20s, like I would be drunk downtown at a bar and I'd see one of your friends or someone that we went to AA with. And I'm like hiding with my head down, like still like, don't let them see me and tell my dad, and I'm like an adult with my own kids.
Yeah. They told me.
Yeah, I know. I know.
I would hear about it. Oh, I saw your daughter in the bar in the gaslight, wasted, getting into a fight with some guy. Feeling great. Yeah, we all have to find our own path. And, it's funny because I remember when I was, kind of growing up in AA, I always kind of felt like that was my security blanket. That was the thing that was going to ensure that you didn't have to go through what I went through. And that's not a guarantee. If there are parents out there listening that have kids and they're thinking that because you raise your kids in AA, be careful because AA is a melting pot of sick people. It's where sick people go to get well. So I'm not saying be careful. Don't bring your kids to AA because they hear a lot and they're exposed to a lot. And, if they do go through struggles, there's no hiding, where to go. It's like you can't get that out of your mind. But kids also will sit there and listen to a lot of war stories. I mean, you heard a lot of war stories, and the really nice thing about getting sober is you get to shed the shame and laugh at some of those stories. And there's a lot of laughter in AA that is purely identification. But the people that don't know that aren't alcoholics, they hear a war story, everybody laughs. So if you start drinking, you have all these war stories to refer to, that everybody thought were really funny and really great. And I had been exposed to a few meetings, back in the day with my dad. When I was a teenager, I would go to someone, I'd hear these war stories and I'd be like, I want war stories, So when I hit it, I did everything I could to remember every night. So I had another good story to talk about, and talk about how hard I partied and how much booze I could drink. And so that's, I think the risk, and I'm not saying that bringing you to AA made you an alcoholic or made you, start partying more, but it's not a guarantee that just because you raise your kids in the program or in a program, in sobriety, it's, a lot of it is household stuff. And I could only do what I could do in the time that you were with me, but I tried really hard to be consistent.
Yeah.
With boundaries and rules and consequences, and not being somebody who would say you're grounded for a week and then let you off 2 days later.
No, it was not like that at your house. It was like that at mom's, which, I mean, mom was working all the time and she knew I wasn't going to listen to her anyway, and then I had made the decision. At one point, I chose to move in with you when I was going into high school because I wanted that discipline. And then I got into high school and I started getting in trouble and the discipline started happening. And I was like, see ya. But no, yeah, people, you would think, you grew up in AA, how are you an alcoholic at, so young? And I think about it. And for a while, like I thought that like being sober now at the age I am now, like having to tell people like, yeah, I'm 18 months sober. Like, I feel like I'm so young, because I remember going to meetings and all of these people were so old compared to me. But now I think back on it and I was like, they're all about the age I am now. Yeah. Like they weren't that old. And yeah, it's just crazy because I remember thinking like when I was drinking and partying, like I remember thinking back, like something would happen and I would remember something that somebody had said in AA and I would like have to brush it out because I knew I was doing the wrong thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's not a guarantee because I mean, I grew up in AA. All of your friends were in AA. We were going to conferences. We were going, like you said, pig roasts, everything. And I still ended up an alcoholic. So,
yeah. But yeah. And it's funny because some of my best friends as a child that turned like Gabe, Gabe and I met because Gabe's mom was in AA and would make him go to Alateen meetings while she was in an AA meeting. And my grandmother, a neighbor across the street, was friends with his mom, was sponsored by his mom, I think, and told my grandmother about Alateen meetings. And so she sent me to Alateen meetings with the girl across the street. And that's where I met Gabe. And so, I think I was 12 and Gabe and I would like try to smoke things to see if it would get you high. Weird things like tea and you know what I mean? Like, this is somebody I met in an Alateen meeting. So to the parents out there, you do the best you can and you don't blame yourself if you're doing your best, and sometimes the best that you can do isn't as good as the best somebody else can do, but it's the best you can do. And, nobody can expect you to do better than you're capable of doing. You do your best. And, you try to offer a stable upbringing. And, if you're from if you live one of the child, if you have a child and it's you're in a divorced family, it's really hard because there's two influences, and sometimes, one positive influence isn't enough to offset the negative influence on another side or just changes or differences in parenting, parenting styles. If you don't agree, then they're going to have polar opposites. And I know for me, for a lot of years, it felt like if I am the opposite, didn't always agree and often agree with the way your mother, the rules and the guidance and discipline. And I figured if I was the opposite, not like hardcore militant disciplinarian, but if I was the opposite as far as being rigid, rigidly consistent, like, if I said no, it was no. That was going to offset it enough that you'd, wouldn't have to go down the same path. It gave you a chance, and it didn't ensure anything. All it ensured was that when you did start to kind of follow in my footsteps as far as the partying and stuff, when it got to be too much, you knew exactly what to do and where to go. You know, you knew how to take care of it. So, you know, there were times when I felt like I had failed. And then when I started to see you kind of come out of it, you know, and you did the same thing I did. You'd try it and sobriety, and then, you know, go back to partying and try sobriety and go back to partying, and for whatever different reasons. But I always knew, all right, you know, I did the best I could to kind of show some examples, and you definitely thrived with the consistency and the dependability of, when I say no, it's no. It was just like easy to move on. If you asked me something and I said the morning you wanted to go to a friend's and I said no, I might have got a why. I mean, once you got a little older as a teenager, then the gloves were off and it was all out war. And I remember somebody saying that teenagers are become different people from the ages of 16 to 18. You just have to wait for them to become themselves again. And I remember it was before you were 16. And when you turned 16, I was like, yeah, that was true. It was rough, you know, especially for us, because we have always been so close. Mm-hmm. You know, for the people that don't know, when I was a teenager, I used to buy weed from a guy that had a little 2-year-old daughter, blonde haired, blue eyes. Her name was Katie. And I would play with her endlessly when I was at his house buying weed. And I remember thinking I would love to have, she was so cute. She had long, you know, blonde hair, blue eyes. And I said, I want a blonde haired, blue eyed little girl named Katie. And so when you were born with bleached blonde hair and blue eyes, and we knew you were going to be a girl. So we had already just decided that your name was going to be Katie. So that was like my first real gift of sobriety, you know, was when you were born. So I knew we were going to be buddies, and we just went everywhere together for a long time. I mean, literally. And then even, you know, when your mom and I split up, we would still take these road trips to Clark's Trading Post. And so it was definitely hard for me. Sometimes I would go into these, like, when at some of my worst, you know, the worst, most intense behavior, you know, reactions towards you during your late teens was usually panic. Yeah. That's what it was, you know, it was panic. Like I felt like all the work I had done, because it seemed like we had achieved so much. And even in school, like you really struggled. And then when I got more involved in high school, you started to kind of come around, and it seemed like you actually had a chance. And then it just went off the deep end. As did mine at some point. And that's when I started to panic. Like I need to, you know, I'm losing it. I felt like I had, you know, worked to achieve so much. And then it was just all falling apart. And, you know, that's where good counselors and AA sponsors come in handy to, you know, bounce those things off and to be reminded that you're doing the best you can. You know, humans have free will, and, you know, kids choose their path, and, you know, you got to just hope that the example that I had set all those years would eventually come back around. And I wasn't ever trying to create a carbon copy of myself, but I like to think that I set some decent examples, and we've always remained super close, which is good, you know, especially in, you know, we had a little bit of a tough time there a few years back. But, you know, things are, you know, definitely have come back around. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I remember it was crazy because I remember the frustration from you and my teachers being in school, because my issue wasn't that I wasn't learning or I wasn't smart. Like it was like I was telling teachers to screw off, or throwing chairs, or, you know, screaming at somebody, or walking out of class, or for whatever reason, I was suspended all the time. And they would get so mad because when I would turn in my work, it was flawless. And they're like, what are you doing? And then they'd bring you in. And I will never forget, something happened at school. I don't remember exactly what. And you had to come pick me up because that was part of my IEP, was
that I needed to be picked up when I was angry, I had to leave school grounds because I was a nut. And you took me to McDonald's and you took me down like by Rye Beach in Portsmouth, and you were pretty quiet, and I was just, pissy teenager looking out the window, and you started crying and you lost it. And you were like, I am doing everything I can to give you more than I ever had. And I don't want you to have to go through what I did. And I remember I was so mad that you were there. Like, I was just so angry that you were there and being my dad. And I was like, just go away, and then I was just sitting there like crying, just so angry. And throughout the years of being a teenager and an adult, like I would get myself into a dumb situation, whether it was hanging out with people I shouldn't have been hanging out with, or drinking, or, doing something I shouldn't have been doing. And I remember thinking, I'm doing what he did and he does not, like, I just remember I was like thinking that you would disapprove. And I remember that moment, like throughout my life, so it's not like you didn't try, you busted your butt to make sure that, I went down the right path. And not to discredit my mom, because my mom really did the best that she could do. My sister had a child insanely young, and, my brother was drinking at a really young age, and my mom was working all the time. And so I had free reign, and then I'd come into your house where there was rules and discipline, and, I had curfews, and it was fine at first. And then as I got older, it just became a joke, and it's just part of being a kid. But yeah, it definitely is one of those things where you made more of an impact, but as a teenager, it didn't seem like that. As a teenager, you were my annoying dad who cared too much. And I had to constantly tell my friends, no, my dad said no, and it was just obnoxious. And now as an adult, I'm like super thankful for it, because now, I'm sober now, and I have a dad that I can call and say, hey, I'm struggling. Have you felt like this? And you can relate, and you can actually guide me through this process, because I'm obviously still very newly sober. And so it's nice to have someone that, is sober and responsible and actually cares, because as a teen, I didn't care, but as an adult, I definitely do.
Yeah. So let's fast forward. I think it was around 2007 or 8. I started really working to try to make a break into the fishing industry, and it went kind of crazy. Like, it took me a few years to really get my foot in the door, but it seems like since I got my foot in the door, like with Clam Outdoors and Vexilar, it's just gone bananas. I'm no internationally famous TV star or anything like that, but from where I started, to get to where I am, I mean, what's that been like? I mean, I know some of your friends are always just like, oh my God.
I remember when you first started guiding, you were hunting and a fishing guide. And I remember you were constantly going out to like scout for turkeys. Like, I remember you were always scouting for turkeys, and it was just like this thing where, that was what you did for a job. And it was like kind of slow, and it was, it was cool to be able to go out and do that stuff with you. And then like, it was so weird. It was like overnight, like all of a sudden you were just like, everybody knew who you were in the area that we lived in. And I worked for Bank of America, and people would come in with Bass Pro Shop fishing, cards, and I would go and do their transaction, and just making conversation. I would be like, oh, do you like to fish? And they're like, oh yeah, I love it. I'm like, oh, my dad's a fishing guide in New Hampshire. And they're like, is it Tim Moore? And it was just so weird that like out of anybody in the area, because you're obviously not the only guide, out of anybody, they just knew instantly that it was you. And it just was like, you were kind of like a small town celebrity, like living in that area. People talk about fishing. I'm like, yeah, my dad's Tim Moore. It's fine. Like, it's pretty cool.
Too funny. Yeah, I mean, it in one hand, it feels like it happened overnight. On the other hand, I'm like, I worked so hard and so long, and I still put like endless hours, because I don't know about a lot of other industries, but I know success in the fishing industry is all about momentum. And it's like rolling a ball. You can't just roll it once and expect it to keep rolling on its own. You have to keep rolling the ball, and so there was such an insane amount of work that went into it. There were times that I sometimes wondered, like, oh, I hope she doesn't get upset that I couldn't have made this happen earlier. Cause I mean, I think actually like when I had my construction business, I probably made more money than, well, I don't know about now, but a couple of years ago, 4 years ago, I definitely was making more money in 2007 when I had my construction business before the crash than I was 4 or 5 years ago as a fishing guide. It's coming around now, but it's been crazy. And here you are, you're 6 years older than I was when I got sober, 2 kids. One of them's supposed to be here, but ice cream is more important than this when you're 8. For sure.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like for me, your success felt like it was overnight because that was the period of time where I was drinking at my absolute worst and I had completely separated myself from you in your life. And so like 3 or 4 years go by and you're, busting your ass to make all this stuff happen. And all of a sudden I come back in, once every 6 months to pop in and you're just like 10 steps further and 10 steps further. Mm-hmm. So for me, it was like, all of a sudden my dad's sponsored by all these people and he's putting on seminars and his name's on a sign at Kittery Trading Post and people are asking me questions and taking pictures with your posters at Kittery Trading Post and like saying hi. But yeah, no, to say that you didn't work hard for this would be an absolute lie. Cause I remember, I remember how hard you worked, even when you were doing hunting as well. It was just nonstop and it's still nonstop. Like even in the last couple of years, it's sometimes impossible to get you on the phone because you're just like, or to get a visit because you're just so busy. And I'm getting to the point now where I've learned the seasons and I know like when dad is going to be available and when he's not, just because, especially ice fishing season, wintertime is like dad's up in the morning, he's home, he's asleep and that's it. Yeah. You love
playing with this one. Well, for those of you out there listening to this that, you might be wondering, I mentioned that I had a daughter, wondering, whatever happened with that. She's still here. I still have her. Didn't sell her, give her away or anything. Parenting sober is so hard. Yeah. Getting sober is an all-consuming thing. And when you go to like AA and they say, don't make any major changes for the first year, like stay out of a relationship, don't have any kids. They say that it's not just about you, it's about them too. And getting sober, especially the first year is such an all-consuming thing. Like there's so much to learn. I mean, I was clueless when I got sober. I knew nothing. I was 20 years old and I knew nothing. I didn't know how to be a 20-year-old. I didn't, 20-year-olds I knew partied their faces off and shirked all their responsibilities. And all of a sudden I'm not going to party anymore and I have responsibilities. And so, hey, I think I'll have a child.
Yeah.
I wasn't a year sober. I wasn't, but I was, a couple of years sober, and it's a difficult thing, but anybody that's newly sober, that's has a child on the way or a young child, it's just don't panic and don't blame yourself if things don't go the way that you want, because I can tell you one thing, how your kids turn out is a very, very difficult thing to control.
There's no guarantee.
There are no guarantees. Sometimes people nail it, but people are, genetically predisposed to certain behaviors or addiction, and, life experiences shape us as adults, not just from our parents, but, your own life experiences have helped shape you and shaped your addictions. And so to the parents out there, don't panic. It's going to be okay. Just keep trying to do the right thing and you'll be okay. I guarantee you being sober for your kids is going to be far better for them than not. So anyway, I wanted to share this part of my story with you guys. There will be more. There are other aspects of my life that I haven't, included yet, relationship stuff and maybe more stuff about the business and all that'll be coming in the future. So hope we didn't bore any of you to death with this one. I know sometimes the the chit chat gets boring for some people. I know the fishing crowd wants to hear more fishing, and the recovery crowd probably wants to hear more recovery. And you can't please everybody all the time. So anyway, thanks for tuning in. Really appreciate it. Thanks to Katie for sitting in and putting up with this. She hates cameras, and we get the video camera running right now. And thanks to this little one back here shaking her head, making all kinds of noise for everybody. We're going to sign off. Thanks for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed this. Stay tuned. More to come.